Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
And we post a video every week on a Friday, so do hit subscribe and the notification bell if you want to know exactly what we're doing every week.
And don't forget our Monday shorts. If you've got an important gardening question you'd like to ask me, put it in the comments below and we will use it on our Monday shorts so that everybody can benefit.
And even an unimportant
Yes.
horticultural question. But Stephen, where are we today?
All right, today we've come back to somewhere we've been before, and some of you who are regular watchers will know about our Salvia story we did, Salvias for shade.
Yes.
And now we're back with Meg Bentley and we're going to look at Salvias for sun.
Which I guess for me was the obvious way to use salvias. So our video about shade-loving ones was incredible for me. And also, just as a little taster, there is a video coming up which is about propagation with salvias with
Yes.
Meg as well. They'll all end up in a playlist, so you'll be able to find all the salvia knowledge you want.
Exactly, and that's what we're all about, is giving knowledge.
We are, so let's go and meet Meg.
All right, let's.
Give me a bit of Salvia 101. So
All right.
where, why, how, what?
Oh, goodness me. Well, it's one of those huge genuses that,
Yeah.
in fact, it's hard to say anything specific in a way.
Yeah.
It's cosmopolitan in its distribution.
Yeah.
There's a few land masses that don't have salvias. Australia apparently is one of them. And you won't find them in New Guinea and you won't find them in Scandinavia, but lots of other parts of the world have at least a selection of them.
Yeah.
There's well over 1,000 accepted species at this stage, although there's a lot of new ones being discovered in South America. So the tally should expand substantially as time goes on. And they vary from flat growing little tiny ground covers, completely herbaceous perennials, up to something that you could call a substantial shrub.
Which we have seen here.
Yes,
Goodness
certainly
me.
we have. And they are a group of plants that you can almost find a salvia that will do anything you want.
Yeah.
And also virtually every colour, because most plant groups have a particular colour.
Pink.
Yeah, pink, yes. A particular colour missing. But salvia has it all. I mean, you've got red, you've got pink, you've got white, you've got blue, you've got yellow, you've got orange, you've got almost all the colours, including a colour that people don't think of terribly often for flowers, and that's brown. So there you go. Salvia does everything.
So Stephen, sun-loving salvia?
Yes, this one is one of the South Africans, and
Yeah.
it doesn't look like most people's concept of a salvia.
Because I would have thought, looking at that leaf, which I'm just going to, hang on, we've got a bit here.
Yeah. Of
That looks to me almost pelargonium-like.
course, the flowers give it away.
Yes.
But this one comes from South Africa through into Botswana, and this is an Australian selection of the species,
Oh.
which has slightly larger leaves. It's probably a slightly more dramatic plant, and it's been called Finngrove. So may not be available overseas. Well worth looking out for, and a really charming salvia that seems to flower, well, almost forever.
Yeah.
It's got flowers that have been, flowers that are coming, flowers that are out. It will flower for months and months yet with these very pretty soft lavender blue flowers on it.
Yeah, but very much about its leaf form, really, isn't it?
Oh,
It's
yes.
so unusual.
Yeah, and it's a moderately small shrub. This
Yeah.
one's actually growing up on a bank, so it looks a little taller than it is.
Yeah.
But yes, a smallish salvia for the smallish garden, I
Yeah.
guess.
Now, although we did just say sun-loving, it is actually getting part shade here, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because it's surrounded by a lot of other plants. So
Yeah.
it's obviously one of those that can adapt a little bit in either direction.
Yeah.
And lots of salvias will do that.
So what do you reckon hardiness for this one?
Well, being a South African one, I can't imagine that it has to go through really, really cold weather.
No.
Certainly wouldn't in Botswana. So I wouldn't say it's an overly frost hardy one, but I would think in, moderate sort of climates, it should be growable in most areas, as long as it has a reasonably well-drained site.
There you go. And we will cover propagation. If you're in a colder climate, of course, you can propagate them and almost use them annually.
Yes, a lot of them actually will make good bedding plants, so you can keep them going year after year just by propagating them on.
Well, one of the more interesting foliage types, but let's go on to the next.
All right.
Stephen, this garden's extraordinary. We are literally in a bower of salvia. So what's this one?
Well, this one's one of the hybrid ones, known as Salvia Amistad.
Ah, now even I've heard of this one.
Yeah, now it's an amazing shade of purple. Any wonder it's become almost a stock-in-trade salvia for the horticultural industry. Most beautiful thing, dark calyxes,
Yeah.
beautiful dark purple flowers. It's quite a substantial plant.
Yep.
Easily 2 to 3 meters tall and flowers for months.
Yeah. Now, what would you suggest in terms of maintenance for this? So, because mine are in pots, I took cuttings from one actually, very easy to propagate as we've
Yeah.
established. And because we're still in a holding pattern until we move, mine just get sort of outrageous in their pots and shade everything out. So
Yeah.
I just lop it down almost whenever it gets too big.
Yeah,
So
well,
not in spring or in autumn, I just kind of do it whenever.
yeah, you probably could do that.
Unkillable,
Yeah,
hashtag.
yeah, it is. It's pretty tough. But as a garden plant, you'd probably try and opt for a period of the year where you could cut it down and it will then replenish itself to give you months and months of flowers. So for mine, I'd probably have it in the garden. I'd leave it over the winter months because I get a little bit of frost.
Yeah.
And then I would give it a good hard haircut in the early spring. And then before you know it, it would be back and flowering virtually through till autumn again.
Wow. And just while we're here, we are surrounded by honey-eating birds eating the nectar from everything that's around us. It's so magical, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the bees are going nuts as well.
They
So
are.
we've got to be careful where we walk in case we annoy them.
True, which also actually, they are a great plant if you want to attract animals. So in Australia, we have honey-eating birds, much as the same that you have in South America
Yep.
and in Africa. So the flower shape really attracts our honey-eating birds. So it's amazing. Obviously, and also the insects as well. But the birds love salvias.
They do. In fact, our Australian native birds will often go past a regular Australian native shrub just to get at a salvia.
There we are. All right, well, let's move on through the bower and find something else.
Yes. Well, this one took your eye, I think, Matthew. It's
Yes.
a really pretty little pink. It's a form of Salvia microphylla, which is one of the North American down into Mexican species. They're basically sun lovers. Will cope with a little bit of shade if they need to. They're comparatively low growing salvias. And this one is a selection called Orchid Showers. And it really is, it's a lovely shade of pink. So great little salvia, would be good in a small garden, probably quite good in a pot. You'd need to trim it back periodically to make it sort of stay a little bit compact perhaps. But in a mixed planting in a big bowl or something like that where it could just waft through other things, I think it would be rather beautiful. Well, Matthew, here's another sun lover. And this one's a South American. So Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, all that part of the world.
Yes.
And it's one of the most intense blue salvias you can find, guaranitica. And it apparently comes in two forms. There's this form, which I had in the garden at home at one stage, that is an absolute thug. It runs like there's no tomorrow, especially if there's a bit of moist soil, and it has sort of tuberish things that run along the rhizomes. If you try and dig it out, it leaves bits behind everywhere, and even the tiniest little bit of rhizome will reshoot. There is, of course, another form which is far more benign. So if you can check out which one you're getting, if you need something to cover acreage, this could be the one for you. But if you want the rich blue, there is a form that stays much more at home.
So this one is getting, although it's in full sun, it does get a bit of shade, so it can take...
Yeah, it can take a bit of each. And of course, if the soil is dryish and a little poor, that will help control this one a little bit. So it's less likely to take off. But yes, I actually had a fight with this one and ended up trying to get rid of it. I still haven't. There's a little bit of it in my blue and yellow border still, but I'm always nervous that it's going to take off again.
Ah, interesting. Well, we've seen a lot of them are suckery, runny, real
exactly.
thugs, so they do have to be maintained. So to maintain it, well, you try and get the form that wasn't a thug, but if you do have a thuggish one, you really just have to chop out the bits.
Yes, you need to restrain it, and I would do it in the winter because this plant is one of those that you'd prune back to the ground in the winter. Once it's down, that's the time you can get in with a sharp spade and try and control the outer parts of the plant and keep it in order.
There you go.
It's sort of worth the effort because it's a lovely rich green, shows off its blue flowers superbly, flowers for ages and ages. So although it's a bit of a thug, many of you might well forgive it. I, on the other hand, haven't at this point. But anyhow.
So we're filming this at the very end of spring, early summer. And it's sort of just going over, isn't it?
Well, there's some that are going over, but there'll be lots more flowers coming.
More buds,
Oh yeah, there'll be plenty more buds yet. So this should flower right through the summer and well into the autumn. In fact, the cold weather might, in fact, be what tells it it's time to stop.
There you go. Ah, this garden is just paradise. All right, on to the next.
Well, I did promise you a brown one, and I've actually found Salvia aurea, which means gold, and that may be stretching things just a tiny bit. It quite literally has tan brown flowers on it, and its calyx is also brown. So when the flowers drop out, you've still got these brown circular calyxes on the plant. But apart from its weird flowers, it does have very attractive silver grey foliage. It's one of the South African species. It loves the hot and sunny spots in the garden, and it will grow to a shrub around about the 2 metres each way. Again, its flowers are a weird colour, but it's still loved by the birds and the insects, and it certainly makes an interesting conversation piece in the garden.
Okay, this is when a sun lover gets a little scary.
Yes, this is Salvia involucrata, which is another one of the salvias from the Americas.
Yep.
And it can be huge.
Well, this is extraordinary. It's a thicket. So would you imagine this was obviously one plant to start with?
Oh yes, and it's hit the ground and taken root. It's suckered. As Meg says, she doesn't like to cut her salvias back too much on a regular basis because the birds tend to nest in them. And so she's let it have its head. And it's taken advantage of that, and it is just huge. It's what, 3.5 metres, maybe 4 metres tall.
Yeah, but the width.
And yes, the original plant is now taking up an area that must be nearly 5 or 6 metres long, maybe more.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, so it's a huge plant.
So,
Yes.
if you were going to grow this, how would you manage it? And well, unless you have a massive garden, there's honey eaters. I want to.
Yeah.
Oh,
Every time we try and take a picture of one, they'll disappear.
Every time I try and film a bird on the flower, of course, it's gone.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to the question. If you wanted to grow this and manage it in your garden, how would you?
All right, well, every late winter, early spring,
Yep.
I would cut the plant back quite hard. If there's any nice new shoots coming up from the bottom, I'd leave them be. And then I'd just go around with the sharp spade and just spade around the clump. Every few years, I might actually take one of the spaded pieces and put that in the ground and start it off as a fresh plant, because a lot of salvias get very old and woody in time. So you might like to start off a fresh one.
Yep.
Maybe you'd put the fresh one in a different part of the garden and then eradicate this one and plant something else.
Yeah. So if you're going to use something of this scale, so this is sort of on the edge. I guess the thing to point out about Meg's garden too is it's wild. It's not like a super maintained garden. Obviously it is maintained, but this is sort of on the edge of a border. So it could be a punctuation point, but it could also be at the back of a classic perennial border.
Of course it could. It would be ideal at the back of a border because it would give height and structure. It also has leaves that are quite handsome in their own way.
Yeah.
So I think the foliage is quite good. It has a long flowering period.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
I mean, this is mainly flowers on old wood that was left here from last season, but it's got all these new canes coming up through the plant, which will give it flower well into the autumn, even perhaps into the winter, if we don't get heavy frost.
Yeah. One of the things Meg was saying, which for those of you not in Australia, you'll find charming, is that there are wallabies in her property, which is a small kangaroo basically. And what she's realized is that they love to get underneath and they trample down the branches and actually kind of push them into the soil and cause layering.
Yeah,
So
they don't eat them. They just
layer them. They're horticulturalists, wallabies.
Yes, they might well get a job if they're not careful.
Yeah.
So involucrata is one of those salvias that obviously is not suited to a tiny garden or tiny space. But if you've got the room for it, yes, the back of a border would be ideal. Flowers for months, and then you just get in there and clean it up about once a year.
So you have got to keep your eye on this type, because around this garden there are a few thickety ones.
Yeah.
So be warned, buyer beware.
Yes, exactly. So, and of course with salvias, they'll soon show you their characteristics.
True colours.
Because most of them are quite fast growing. And so if you plant involucrata or any of its forms or hybrids, it won't take you long to work out how big this plant can get. So you might not actually have enough time to read the reference books before it takes off. So there you go. So it can be quite a big plant, but it's certainly lovely and the birds love it. And it's just, a classical, beautiful, large shrubby salvia.
It is very impressive. Okay, onwards and upwards.
Well, Matthew, this is actually one that I have in my own garden already, so I don't have to beg, borrow or steal one from Meg. This particular salvia, forskahlei, comes from Europe, mainly Bulgaria, Turkey, and that sort of area around Europe, Greece as well. And it's a herbaceous perennial one, tends to die down to almost nothing in the winter, has big, soft, quite attractive foliage, I have to say, and then these towering spikes of beautiful lavender blue flowers with a white centre, and there's a quite tall one over there in the corner behind me, And if you look on the other side behind me, there are lots of self-sown seedlings. So it is one that does need to come with a health warning. If it likes your garden, it will self-seed itself all over the place, although I don't find them that hard to dig out and get rid of if I've got too many of them. This particular salvia is quite adaptable actually. It will grow in semi-shade through to full sun. It does better where the soil's a little bit on the richer side and a little bit moisture retentive, but it's a pretty hardy, easygoing salvia. So I have it popping up in my garden in quite a lot of spots. Some I leave it in, some I dig it out of. Of course, this would be the perfect salvia for people who are in really cold climates. Because it basically dies down in the winter, it's going to come through the average winter quite well. And in fact, sometimes the even less than average winter, which could be colder than I have to deal with, it will pop up again with aplomb come spring. Well, again, this is a plant I'd grow in my garden even if it didn't flower. This is one of the South American salvias, Salvia macrophylla. Its foliage and its stems are actually quite tacky and sticky. The reverse of the leaf is the most beautiful purple, and the leaves are, as the name would suggest, large. It's a beautiful looking plant. Apparently the flowers are blue. It's not in bloom at this stage, and it would seem to me to be one of those that would like a little bit of shade and shelter, and certainly it wouldn't want to be out in a blasting windy sort of spot, because I don't think it would cope for very long. But lovely looking plant, and I think I need to talk to Meg about whether it's hardy enough for me to have one.
What do we have here, Stephen?
All right, well, involucrata doesn't just come in that sort of...
Giant thug.
Well, I think they're all pretty big growing, actually. Yeah. But that sort of wild form is that sort of hot magenta-y pink. This one is, well, would you call it soft rose pink, maybe?
I just call it soft pink, Stephen.
Soft pink, all right, soft pink will do. And this is a selection of involucrata called Pink Icicles. It doesn't look to be as vigorous a plant, but then having said that, this one's up the hill a little bit in a slightly drier aspect. So in damper, moister soils, it might turn out to be just as big growing as straight involucrata.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's a very pretty soft pink. It's made a bush 2 meters tall by 3 meters across, perhaps. And again, it's getting these lovely long sprays of really pretty pink flowers.
So same care as its sort of species forebear?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It's just a selected form, so it's just a colour variant which may have shown up in cultivation, or it may have been something that was found in the wild.
Yeah.
That often happens, but it's rather pretty, and I do like this soft pink, I have to say.
Yeah. One of the things we haven't really mentioned yet is that so many of them have amazing leaf fragrance.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, you've only got to pick some sage to go with your onions, and you realise that there is in fact some fabulous scents amongst the salvias. Yes, many of them have beautifully scented foliage. Most of them you have to rub it as you go past to let the volatile oils out. Yes, some of them have amazing scents.
I must say though, because there are so many in Meg's garden, there is the most wonderful aroma in this garden.
Oh yeah, yes, it sort of permeates from everywhere. It's fabulous.
It does indeed. All right.
Let's go and have a look at an Australian hybrid of involucrata that's become quite a common and popular garden plant.
Oh, common and popular, your middle name, Stephen.
Yes, exactly.
Let's go.
Look at this thug.
Yes, my goodness. I'm frightened. This has run all the way down this embankment.
Yes.
And it's massive.
It is huge. This is actually an Australian hybrid of, in fact, involucrata that was found in the town of Timboon in the Western Districts of Victoria and is appropriately known as Salvia Timboon.
There
you go. So it was discovered and thought, you know, this is odd. It doesn't look quite like its parent, and so it was brought back. Everybody decided it was a hybrid thereof, and so I've given it the cultivar name of the town where it comes from.
Charming, charming. Yes. But it's got those same very vigorous tendencies.
Oh yeah, yes, it's quite a strong, vigorous growing plant, and although it's growing here in full sun and it's perfectly happy in a full sun spot, I've actually got Timboon in the garden at Macedon, and because I get heavier frosts than we get here, a lot of my salvias I've got to give a bit more shelter. And I've actually got this growing in what I would call moderately heavy shade. And it does quite well. I cut it down in the spring, it takes till the autumn to start flowering. If we don't get heavy frosts, it will flower right through the winter for me. If we get heavy frosts, well, it'll have a short flowering period in the late autumn and that'll be it. But it's certainly a good doer, and it seems to be a little more cold hardy than its parent.
I was going to say, so it obviously can thrive in your climate.
Yeah.
And so I guess your climate is controlling it to some degree too.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas here it's just rampant.
Yes, it might as well be at home in Timboon, really.
Yeah. I guess though, you know, for those of you with large gardens with a lot to fill, plant yourself one of these giant thuggy salvias.
Yes, exactly. It does go to show, and I think we will have to engage with some little tiny ones, because these ones are probably scaring most people off salvias, really.
They are. All right, let's go and do just that.
Yeah. Well, not all the sun-loving salvias have to be great big shrubs, and Meg pointed this funny little fellow out to me earlier today, and it's one of the South African ones, Salvia Schlecteri, and it's just coming into bud, so it's got its wee little flower buds just forming at the moment, so it'll flower for us in the late spring, summer period, probably right through till the autumn. I quite like its little feathery leaves, and apparently that's about it. So 15 to 20 centimetres will probably see this one out. So there's a salvia for everybody. All right, well here we've got another South African, and this time it is in flower. This is Salvia dentata, and it has quite fine foliage, also very pretty little lavender blue flowers with a white throat, and it's probably 30 centimetres would see it out. It's obviously been in flower for a while now. There's actually some finished flower spikes on it, but it's got oodles of new growth coming up as well. So again, this little salvia will probably go on right the way through until the autumn. Not quite sure where dentata comes from because there doesn't look to be anything dentate about it, but anyhow, I'm sure the botanist who named it knew what he was doing. All right, Matthew, we seem to have run the colour gamut here. We're now at white and we've covered nearly everything else. So here we have one of the South African species, which is white. It looks to me like it's a semi-herbaceous one, so it will need to be cut back hard every winter, I should think. And it has very pretty candelabras of white flowers in high summer.
Yeah, fantastic leaves.
Yep.
And a really great form because it's very spiry, but it doesn't seem to be a massive clumper.
No, I think it's one of those plants that would give good vertical accents in a garden, and certainly isn't going to swamp out its companions. In fact, I think if anything has a crack at it, its companions will swamp it out.
Yeah.
So yes, the pelargonium that's growing with it and the tree lupin are all fighting it out together, and no one's winning at this stage.
No, but you know, the pelargonium comes from the same part of the world and they actually look really good together.
This one is Salvia radula, and I've not come across this one before, and I'm sorry, but I'm just becoming a little bit obsessed by salvias myself, I think.
I am. You know, every time we go to a collector or someone who specializes, I just get obsessed. I'm loving this one. Now, this is South African. So as we've experienced, there are salvias from all over a lot of the world, very different climates. But can we generalize? So here we've got a lot of South African ones.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say most South African salvias are full sun, drought tolerant? Or is it just too broad to generalize?
I think in some ways it's probably a bit broad to generalise. All I would say though about them is that certainly in cultivation, the vast majority of South African ones that we seem to have in the country here do seem to be sun-loving varieties. So, but I can imagine there's probably somewhere in the Drakensberg Mountains or somewhere like that where there's a salvia that needs cool shade. But most of the ones that I've seen from that part of the world here all seem to be sun-loving, pretty hardy plants.
Yeah. The leaves are great on this. And you know, this is kind of doing, for me, what a verbascum might do in a perennial border. Amazing leaves, single growth point, striking flower. Obviously, it's white, not yellow.
Yeah, so I think it does. I think plants with that vertical accent look can be enormously useful in borders because it's a great shape.
It is indeed. Okay.
Well, Matthew, it's not always about flowers when it comes to salvias, and this one is one of the handful of species that comes from the Canary Islands, and somebody with an amazing imagination decided to call this Salvia canariensis, and it's the silvery foliage form which goes under the name of candidissima, and it's a lovely plant. It looks like it's going to get up to around about 1.5 meters, and you can see the flower spikes starting to form, but I'd be quite happy with this plant in my garden just for its foliage. It's really pretty, and being Canary Islands, It's probably very happy where it gets quite hot, dry, probably doesn't need particularly good soil. And in fact, some of these ones look better if they're not too well fed and fat and sassy looking.
Well, Stephen, talking of full sun,
Yes,
here we are.
out in the full sun and with some salvias.
There you go. And this one is very familiar to me.
Yes.
Tell the people.
All right. Well, this is Salvia Hot Lips, which is one of the microphylla forms or hybrids.
And can I just say, I don't like that name. It just sounds a bit vulgar.
Yeah, well, what can I say? It sort of says the story, even though I agree with you on the name, because it does have flowers that have what one could consider hot lips.
Hot lip.
Yeah. I didn't like this plant, not so much because of its name, but because I thought it was unstable.
Yeah.
And
Very judgmental of you, Stephen.
it is sort of, but it's obvious because it gets white flowers in it, it gets fully red flowers in it, and it gets these white and red flowers. And I'd assumed that it was reverting to different varieties, but Meg tells me that's not the case. Early in the season, you'll get flowers of one shade, generally more the white, then you'll get flowers of the red, and then as the season advances and you go more into the late summer, autumn, all the flowers pretty well will go the bicolour.
Isn't that fascinating?
Well, it's certainly a different thing. You know, normally if I see a flower that's not the same colour as the main part of the plant, I assume I've got a sport or a throwback of some sort.
Yeah.
But apparently this is quite stable, even though it doesn't look it. So it's a bit like me, really.
And given that we've looked at some real extremes of height, this is hip height.
Yeah, it is. It's about hip height, grows a little wider than it is tall. Again, it's one of those plants that will probably benefit from a really good hard cutting.
Yeah.
Again, I'd probably do most of these in the early spring, so that gives them time to reshoot again when the weather's warming up and to get their flowers in the right numbers and at the right time of the year, because it's right through the summer and autumn months that this plant is really at its best.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. And this whole bed is just filled, brimming with different types of salvias. It's extraordinary.
Yes, they're everywhere.
Yeah. I guess we should point out, this is on a real slope too.
Yeah.
So Meg's point was the drainage here and the sun are quite extreme.
Oh yes, and all of these plants are flourishing in
They
it.
really
So
are.
if you've got a Mediterranean style climate, you can't go past a lot of the salvias, I have to say. Well, we've looked at lots of different colours so far, and this one stood out at me because it's such an incredible shade of red, and I do love good red in a garden. This is a form of Salvia darcyi, which is a Mexican species, and it's a selection that was made in Queensland that goes under the name of Josh. So should be easy to remember with 4 letters in the name. And it looks to me like it's probably one that'll get up to about waist height or so. I think the colour of the flowers are remarkable. The foliage is fairly classical salvia looking, so there's nothing outstanding or different about the foliage, but the flower colour's lovely. Mexican species, generally speaking, most of those are sun lovers, and I would imagine that darcyi in any of its forms would do better in a nice open sunny aspect. So there you go, really good in the shade of red.
Well, Stephen, isn't Meg's garden just the most beautiful place?
Oh, it's one of those places that you can just wander around in a daze. It's just beautiful.
Well, I did. Never seen so many salvias in one spot.
Yes, exactly.
And if you want to see more salvias in one spot, as we mentioned, Meg does volunteer at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Melbourne on a Tuesday.
Yep.
She's very happy for you to stalk her,
Yeah.
go and find her, say hello and ask her any salvia questions.
Yes, exactly. Oh, well, that was fantastic. I'm really pleased about the salvias we've seen today. And of course, we've had our shade-loving salvia video that you can go and look at.
Yep.
And we've got our upcoming one, which will come up in due course, about salvia propagating as well.
Yes.
So what more could you want?
What more could you want about salvias? But what more could you want will be more from us. So if you want to know what we're doing next week, hit subscribe. We post every week on a Friday.
And don't forget our Monday shorts. So if you've got a question for me, pop it in the comments below and we'll get round to doing it.
We will indeed. And occasionally we have just done, and we will do again, a live on a Saturday morning Australian time. So we will let you know when we're doing our next live. But until then, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.